My name is Emma Thompson. My husband James, our kids, Lucas, who's 7, and Ella, who's 5, and I moved to an old mansion in Wilmington, North Carolina, last spring. The house was huge, with stone walls, stained glass windows that cast strange light, and a heavy feeling, like someone was always watching. It was a steal because it had been empty for years. Locals whispered about it, but we thought they were just rumors. Looking back, I wish we'd listened. It started the first week. Lucas, usually a happy, curious boy, came to me one night and said, "Mom, I saw a lady in the hallway. Her dress was like an old princess's, but her face, it looked burned." His voice trembled, eyes full of fear. I thought he'd had a nightmare or seen something in a movie. I checked the hallway. Nothing but shadows and the sound of wind through old windows. I told him to relax and put it back to bed. A few nights later, Ella, who's always quiet and shy, woke up screaming at midnight. I ran to her room and found her curled up on her bed, pointing at the window. There was a man there. He had a tall hat and glowing eyes, like a cat. I opened the window, but the backyard was empty, just tree branches swaying in the wind. When I touched the glass, it was unnaturally cold, like it had been in a freezer. I told Ella it was a dream, but I had a bad feeling. After that, the kids weren't the same. Lucas refused to go to his room, sleeping on the downstairs couch instead. Ella came to our bed every night, saying, "Someone's calling my name." A thin voice like a bell. James thought they were stressed from a move, but I knew it was something else. One night, while sorting laundry in the basement, I heard footsteps upstairs, like the kids running. I thought they were playing, but when I went up, they were both asleep. My heart raced. Who was running? A worse incident happened a few nights later. Around 2 a.m., Lucas came to our room crying. The lady came to my room. She said this house is hers, and if we don't leave, we won't survive. When I asked where she was, he pointed to an old mirror in the hallway, a large one with a wooden frame I'd always disliked. James checked the mirror. Nothing. But when he returned, his face was pale. He said he saw a shadow behind him in the reflection for a moment, then it vanished. The next day, Ella drew a picture that still chills me. It showed a woman in a long dress with a burned face by a mirror and a man in a tall hat by a window. She wrote underneath, "They don't like us." When I asked what it was, she cried and said, "They come every night." I knew this wasn't just childish imagination. The worst happened one night at 3 a.m. A loud crash came from upstairs. The window in Lucas's room had shattered. We found Lucas on the floor, hugging his knees, staring at the wall. The man with the hat came. He said, "If I don't tell you to leave, the next glass will break my head." There was nothing in the room to explain the broken window. No rock, no branch. James said it might be the wind, but I knew better. We called the police that night. The police came and searched the house. They said a bird might have hit the window or someone was pranking us. But when I told them what the kids saw, an older officer who seemed to know about the house said, "Ma'am, this house has a history. You better find somewhere else." I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head and left. We called a priest after that. He started a blessing ritual, but midway through, the candles went out and a loud dragging sound came from upstairs. The old mirror was on the floor, cracked, as if thrown in anger. The priest said, "This house is haunted. Something doesn't want you here." We couldn't take it anymore. A week later, we left and rented a small apartment in another city. But the kids still wake up at night. Ella says she hears whispers, and Lucas is terrified of mirrors. I've seen shadows and glass reflections too. I don't know what that house was, but it took a piece of my kids' spirits. My name is Claire Stone. My husband, Nick, our son, Miles, who's 7, and I live in a 2-story house in the suburbs of Providence, Rhode Island. It's a modest place, white walls, a small yard with rose bushes, and an attic full of old boxes. We've been here since Miles was born. I never thought our familiar home could terrify us to the brink of madness. But what Miles started seeing and hearing wasn't from this world. It felt like something from another realm. It began on a spring day. Miles, always a cheerful, talkative kid, ran in from the yard and said, "Mom, there was a weird bird in the tree. It had no wings, but it talked. It told me to listen." I laughed at first. Miles loves animals and often makes up stories about the neighbor's cats. I asked, "What did it say?" With an odd seriousness, he replied, "It said if I don't listen, they'll come for me." My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was just a child's imagination. I sent him to wash up for dinner. A few nights later, I woke up at midnight to Miles crying. I ran to his room and found him curled up on his bed, pointing at the ceiling. "They're up there. Lots of faces. They're watching me." I looked, but it was just the usual lamp shadows. I sat with him to calm him down, but when I held his hand, his fingers were ice cold, like he'd been in snow. "What faces, Miles?" I asked. "Like people, but their eyes are black. They're in the walls." My stomach churned, but I told him it was a nightmare and stayed until he slept. As I turned off the light, I swear I saw something move in the dark corner. Miles changed after that. He stopped playing in the yard, staying in his room with the curtains drawn. He said he heard whispers at night, like lots of people talking, but I can't understand them. One evening, while reading him a story, he snapped, "Mom, they say you shouldn't know." "Who?" I asked, but he just cried and hid in my arms. Later, as I walked downstairs, a cold breath grazed my neck like someone was blowing on me. I turned. Nothing. A worse incident happened a few days later. While I was cooking dinner, Miles ran in, terrified, yelling, "The birds are here. They're at the window." I rushed to the living room window and froze. There were shapes outside. Not birds, not people, but wisps of black smoke with glowing eyes. When I stepped closer, they vanished. The glass was coated in a thin layer of frost, despite the warm weather. I told Nick, but he thought we were overreacting. I knew better. The worst happened one night at 3 a.m. A loud thud from upstairs jolted me awake. I found Miles on his bedroom floor, shaking like he was seizing, his eyes wide and fixed on the wall. I looked and saw jagged symbols carved into the plaster, like broken letters scratched by claws. Miles whispered, "They want to take me. They said if I don't do what they want, the walls will eat me." Nick touched the wall and said it felt like it was pulsing. We called 911. The police arrived and inspected the house. They said someone might have tried to scare us, carving the symbols with a knife. But when I asked them to touch the wall, a younger officer jumped back, saying, It's moving." They advised us to leave for a while. An older officer, who seemed to know the area's history, said, "This house was built on an old church site. They say things were buried in the ground that shouldn't have been awakened." I asked what, but he just shook his head and left. We called a paranormal expert, Marion, who said the house was crawling with traces. Not human, not ghosts, something older. During her cleansing ritual, the lights flickered, and a scream-like wail erupted from the basement. Marion urged us to leave. We moved to my mom's in Boston that week. But Miles still isn't the same. He wakes up screaming, saying they still see me. In the shadows. I once found a paper in his pocket, covered in those same symbols from the wall. I don't know what they were, but a piece of my son stayed in that house. My name is Emily Bird. I'm a babysitter in Benton, Kentucky. I've been looking after kids for years, crying babies, rowdy toddlers, you name it. I thought nothing could surprise me, but what happened last summer at the Harrisons' house still haunts me like a nightmare. I was only supposed to watch their son, Finn, who's 6, for one evening. That night turned into something I can't explain. The Harrisons' house was a typical 2-story with brick siding, big windows, and a front yard full of sunflowers. When I arrived, Mrs. Harrison, rushing to a work event, said Finn was a bit shy but sweet. Dinner was in the fridge, bedtime was 9 p.m., and a call if anything came up. Finn stood by the door, clutching a stuffed bunny, his brown hair messy. He smiled, but his eyes had a weight no 6-year-old should carry. Things were fine until dusk. Finn and I drew pictures, built a Lego castle, and I made him a sandwich. But as the house darkened, Finn changed. He sat on the couch, staring at an empty corner. "Finn, you okay?" I asked. In a quiet voice, he said, "They're coming and going. They always come now." I thought he was talking about imaginary friends. "Who?" I asked. "The hands. They come out of the floor." A chill ran through me, but I told myself he was just making up stories. I suggested we go upstairs to brush his teeth. On the stairs, Finn stopped and stared at the wooden floor. "Don't look at them, Emily. If you see them, they'll want you to." His tone was so serious it rattled me. I glanced down and swear I saw a faint hand, like smoke, slip out from the floorboards and vanish. I rubbed my eyes, blaming the dim light. Finn was trembling, gripping my hand. In his room, I tried to distract him with a dinosaur book, but he slammed it shut. "They won't let me sleep. They say I have to play with them." "Where are they?" I asked. He pointed under his bed. I checked. Nothing but toys and dust. But as I stood, something cold grabbed my ankle like icy fingers. I yelped, stumbling into his desk. Finn just stared and said, "I told you not to look." Past 9 p.m., the house felt oppressive. I suggested we watch a movie downstairs. In the living room, the TV turned on by itself. Not to a show, but static with a hissing whisper coming through. Finn cried, "They're mad because you're here." I tried to turn it off, but the button didn't work. Even after I unplugged it, the screen stayed on, whispers growing louder. I was scared now. The worst came at 11 p.m. As I called Mrs. Harrison to come home, a heavy dragging sound echoed from the basement. Finn clung to me, sobbing, "They're down there. They're always in the basement." I didn't want to go, but I couldn't leave him alone. With a flashlight in Finn's hand in mine, I opened the basement door. A rotting, wet earth smell hit me. Down the stairs, I saw strange circular patterns on the floor, drawn in a black, sticky substance. Finn whimpered. "They made me come here. They said I had to draw these." I'd had enough. I called 911, saying there was an emergency. 2 officers, Reed and Martinez, arrived. They examined the basement, noting the drawings. Reed said, "Looks like graffiti, but this stuff smells chemical." Martinez tried to collect a sample, but jerked back, saying it moved. I told them what Finn said about the hands. Reed smirked nervously, kids and their stories, but Martinez looked uneasy. She asked Finn, "When did you draw these?" Finn cried, "I didn't. They held my hand." Reed said they'd file a report and might send a specialized team to investigate the substance. Martinez seemed anxious. As we left the basement, a loud crack, like breaking wood, came from behind us. Reed's flashlight caught a shadow on the wall, a massive hand with long fingers. He drew his gun, shouting, "Who's there?" "Nothing." Martinez whispered to me, "I've been on the force for 20 years, but I've never seen anything like this." They told us to take Finn somewhere safe and not return until the house was cleared. Mrs. Harrison arrived, horrified. I explained everything, and she admitted Finn had been talking about hands for months, but she thought it was nightmares. The police said they'd send an environmental team to investigate the basement. I stayed until Finn was taken to his grandmother's. As I packed my bag, I saw a smoky hand in the hallway mirror, reaching for me. I spun around. Nothing. I never worked for the Harrisons again. I heard they sold the house after a team found the black substance was an unidentified compound that vanished under heat. But I still dream of those patterns and the TV's whispers. I don't know what Finn saw, but those hands weren't just in the basement. They're still hunting him. Don't let the shadows find you. Subscribe now and hit the bell to face more nightmares. Your next terror is waiting. Dare to comment your scariest moment below. If you're still here,